Good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 7 of a systematic introduction to the Buddhist path course. Meeting more people. So welcome. For those who are new, welcome. And for those who have been here before, welcome again. My name is Elise and I'll be your host for tonight's session. So just a few reminders before we begin. During the session, we invite you to participate in sharing any of your thoughts and questions. So if you have any thoughts and questions, please post it on the chat. The session will be recorded and the video will be posted on YouTube. And due to our center being closed during the lockdown, Metta Center has been running low on donations. So if you would like to support our events and what we do, we'll post details on the chats for donation to our And if you would like to support Metta Rama, which is the nuns monastery where Ayyā Suvīrā is staying, we'll also send out the link on the chat. And throughout this course, we will be, Ayyā Suvīrā will be using the text, the word of the Buddha, which I'll post the file on the chat if you don't have. So, yeah, you're back. So on to you now.
Okay, great. Sorry, I just had some minor technical issues, but we should be back online now. So welcome to everyone who's come this evening. It's nice to see some new faces, and also hi to everyone who'll be joining us later on YouTube. I know this time was a little bit inconvenient for some people, but it will be recorded, so there'll be more people viewing later on. So before we begin, I'll start by saying Namo Tassa to acknowledge the original teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so please bear with me while I get the file up, so I can put it on screen share. Okay, so if things are going well, you'll be able to see my screen and the text that's there. So where we finished off last week, we've been looking at the Noble Eightfold Path. So what we looked at last week, we'd already gone through right view, the samaditthi, the right motivation or the right intention, samasankappa, right speech, samawacha, and this week we'll be looking at right action, samakammanta. So, it should be an interesting week because, we've started from the foundation of view, from something we do with our mind. So view and intention, or view and motivation, those are both mental factors. We've looked at verbal factors, which are speech, and now we're looking at some physical activity or things that we do with our body and with our ethics and character in life. So, and just a heads up too, the content for this week is an adaptation. It's not direct quote from the Sutta Pitaka. And as we work through the content, we'll be exploring a little bit why Ajahn Brahm may have chose to present this material in this manner. So continuing with the text, I hope you can also see my screen. So right action. What now is right action? So the quote here comes from the Digha Nikaya number 22, which, if we will remember from last time, is the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. So Maha meaning longer, and Satipatthana, Sati being mindfulness, Patthana being the foundation of mindfulness, so the longer discourse on the foundations of mindfulness. And this is from, the definitions of the Noble Eightfold Path that are found in that sutta. Sutta being a word for a Buddhist text. So we have the definition of right action here. Refraining from the destruction of life, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. So if you have had any exposure to Buddhist communities, to the way that traditional Buddhism is practiced, this particular set will probably look familiar to you, because in Buddhism we have something called sila, which can be translated as ethics or character development. And, the most basic set of sila for practicing Buddhists is the 5 precepts. So here we have the first 4 of them. And, keen observers may have noticed that the precept against drinking alcohol is missing. And, there's a reason for that. Basically because these are the first 4 are actually, they're more foundational than the 5. So there is a set which has just the first 4. So a different way of formulating that particular set. And as I may have mentioned earlier, this set predates Buddhism. And also, if we look at different social and ethical codes across many societies and different religions, these are also concepts that are found in the world's major religions. So continuing to read on. So here, having abandoned the destruction of life, you abstain from the destruction of life. With the rod and weapon laid aside, conscientious and kindly, you dwell compassionate toward all living beings. So where we're reading from is the Chunda Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. So this particular sutta, the theme of the sutta was the practices of certain Brahmanical groups. How do you actually purify yourself? And, some of the methods that the Brahmins suggested for purifying yourself, suggesting that when you get up in the morning, you should stroke the earth, or you should do some sun worship. Actually, the Buddha is saying that these things, they don't really lead to self-purification. What actually leads to self-purification is undertaking a path which has a foundation in ethics or a foundation in sila. So continuing on with the passage, having abandoned the taking of what is not given, you abstain from taking what is not given. You do not steal the wealth and property of others in the village or in the forest. Having abandoned sexual misconduct, you abstain from sexual misconduct. You do not have sexual relations with those under the age of consent, with those who are unable to give consent, e.g. being mentally disabled, who are not free to refuse consent, such as a student to their teacher, where such conduct would be breaking a law, or even with one already engaged. And like I mentioned, this is an adaptation. The text itself, it talks about concepts like guardianship, which are a little bit culture specific. And, if you live in a society where those concepts are relevant, you probably know about them already. So, if you know about them, I can't tell you anything more. If you don't know about them, now probably may not be the best time for me to explain the original concepts in detail, simply because the way that society is structured has changed so much. I have an hour and a half. I can't, for me to actually go through the process of explaining 2,500 years of social change, It isn't what I'm actually here to do. Although that being said, my degree was in studies in religion. I had a major focus in Indian social ethics, and I spent a lot of time with a particular class of Indian legal literature called Dhammasara, which actually looks at some of these issues, like law and conduct in ancient Indian society. So this is the accessible version, where we look at, like I mentioned the other day, if we think about each of these precepts like a set of expanding circles, there's the content which is at the middle of the circle that everyone can agree is wrong. So in terms of not taking life, everyone can agree that taking a human being's life is wrong. So, murder is at the center of the precept. So everyone knows it's wrong and go to jail if you do it. But as you start to go further towards the edge of the circle, you get issues where people might legitimately disagree, or there might be, circumstantial reasons why, people may do these things, or there may be some other type of mitigating factor, why people's life is just complex. So as we go out from the center of the circle, in terms of things that count as taking life in Buddhism, we also have taking animal life, which is also not encouraged in Buddhism. When this is presented sometimes in, in popular Buddhist literature, maybe the type of literature you might just pick up at, your average local temple, sometimes it's presented in slightly unsophisticated ways. And, to the point where there are many Buddhists who think that the whole point of their religion is, vegetarianism and being reborn in the Pure Land. But actually, that's not the point of Buddhism. The point of Buddhism is liberation through attaining Nibbana. So it's important to be conscious that, the way the Buddha himself taught these issues is sometimes significantly more nuanced than the type of presentation we get in popular Buddhist literature today. So, and as we move towards the edges of the circle, there are also issues like suicide, euthanasia, abortion, and other types of, destruction of life, such as environmental destruction. So all of these issues are also dealt with in Buddhism, but like I said, it is possible for there to be nuance. So as monks and nuns, because our lives, we're under the discipline of the Vinaya, the particular weight that each of these issues is given is spelled out in some detail. So, say for example, as monks and nuns, in the religions that originate in Central India, like Jainism and in Buddhism, there's also a prohibition on taking plant life. So the idea of non-harm is very well established in these religions. So things like digging the soil, taking plant life, there are also things that monks and nuns refrain from. But at a lay level, of course, people's jobs, people's livelihoods, typically they do involve, some type of destruction of life. And that's something that we have to be conscious of. But we understand that we live in a complex world, and quite often the things that we do that involve taking life, there's normally also some benefit involved as well too. If your job, if you have the veggie garden at home, yes, that there are some aspects that are harmful, but, there's a benefit too, which is that you have vegetables, even if you do have to dig the soil to get there. So I think, the key take-home points is that yes, things like murder are definitely wrong. There are a range of other issues that could also be considered destruction of life, but, they fall towards the edge of the circle. rather than at the center of the circle. And also Buddhism, it doesn't make demands on people that are unreasonable. You know, yes, you can continue your life with a degree of harm. And, you know, we just acknowledge that life is complex, and that the intention that we take to that behavior, it really matters. You know, if you're intending to grow a vegetable garden and you end up killing some earthworms, you know, that intention is far superior, you know, to the intention to just go out and cause an earthworm massacre. So, I mean, personally, I find this area very inspiring, but it's important to be aware that Indian religions, even from the time of the Vedas, have given more attention to concepts like harm to plant life than Abrahamic religions. You know, for example, in the Vedas, it talks about, you know, the suffering you might experience in hell, you know, thinking about all of the trees that you've killed. And there's nothing like that in Abrahamic religions. So it's a slightly different way of thinking about the world. But when we think about social issues today, issues like seed preservation, environmental preservation, actually we can see it's very important to acknowledge that the scope of what counts as life is slightly larger than our own anthropocentric world. Anthropocentric being, you know, human-centered. And, you know, again, towards the edge of the circle, in traditional Asian societies, you know, people were also concerned with eggs. And that's why, you know, eggs are classed as meat in many traditional Asian ways of thinking, because prior to the introduction of farmed chickens, you know, all eggs, there was always a risk they could be fertilized in the village in Asia. So that's why you see a lot of literature, you know, advising, you know, don't eat eggs. But sometimes this literature is a little bit dated and doesn't necessarily reflect the actual conditions that we have here in Australia at the moment. So, I mean, back to the issue of vegetarianism, again, in ancient India, the diet wasn't particularly protein rich. They didn't have things like soy cultivation or tofu like they had in China. You know, if you've ever been to Uttar Pradesh, I can't really recommend the food. You know, typically it's things like rice and khichdi or dal. So in the Buddha's time, there was no requirement of vegetarianism, because it would have been asking something from people that they couldn't do. Because, you know, the level of food technology wasn't actually high enough to, you know, to mandate something like this on everyone. So what the Buddha taught was the free pure meats, that we don't, for the monks and nuns, we don't ask for the animal to be killed. We don't see or hear the killing. So this was the level of distance that the Buddha recommended, you know, that even if we're not, even if we can't give up meat entirely, we're not getting our minds involved in the violence of killing, and we're still maintaining a space in our lives, you know, where we can just focus on having the positive intentions. So those are just some brief reflections on that point. I mean, as we go along, what I'll do, you know, we will actually have a pause for questions, and I'd say probably now is actually a good place to pause, because there's a lot of content there. And I've just noticed that Michael has a question. So Michael has the quote, "Dwell compassionate toward all living beings. Are plants, trees also included? If not, why not? They also have intelligence, feelings, plus birth, disease, old age, and death, etc., just like animals." Yeah, I mean, there is actually material in the canon directly on this point. You know, are plants sentient? And I have to say, I like plants, but I'm not convinced they're sentient. You know, they're alive and that they grow, they reproduce, they have little plant seedlings. But I'd say they're a very different class of life to something like an animal. But sure, protecting life does include protecting plants and trees in traditional Buddhism. And, like I said, that's why the monks and nuns have the rule against harming plant and seed life. But, like I said, Buddhism doesn't ask things from people that are unreasonable. And there's also a matter of degree, how far you choose to adopt a non-harm ethic in your own life. Environmental protection, it's something that's, it's not a new issue. If you actually go to India, there's the local manner of marking the government-owned trees, which is they have the white band around them. So, even in India, there's a concept of, the trees, they're protected. And some of the ways that the thought world worked in pre-modern society, you do have a concept of sacred groves and of, areas that you can only touch at certain times of the years, also concept of, taboos. So all of these functioned to protect plants in the natural world. So, yeah, it's interesting actually that in terms of even modern Buddhist society in Thailand, for example, sometimes the only places that haven't been logged are actually the Buddhist temples. So I think people know and understand that when you have a Buddhist monastery, it's a place for protecting all life. Okay. So, like I said, now might be a good point to open up to questions. I hope that's helped, Michael. If not, just let me know and I can expand further. But is there anything else? Any other questions on this point?
I'm a vegan, and I find that the egg industry is pretty rotten. Hens get de-beaked, and what the Australian government claims is free range is not how natural birds would live. It's quite cruel, and caged eggs is banned in many countries. That's still permitted in Australia. I think that hens are very badly done by, and I can't agree with eating them myself.
Yeah. So was that a comment, Michael? Sorry, not Michael. It's Bill, I think. Yeah, Bill.
Bill, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I take your comment. I grew up next door to a commercial chicken farm, and I agree with you. I don't see any economic or any real benefit of caged hens. I don't support them personally at all. And de-beaking again, I don't support it either. Just because I've had significant exposure to the egg industry for a period of time. My own family were producing duck eggs. So yeah, no, they're real issues, and certainly I hope there's further action taken in this area. Like I said, the production of eggs for eating isn't actually a feature of many traditional Asian village societies. So it's not a topic that's really addressed directly, but certainly many Buddhist societies do have a strong preference against eating eggs because of the risk they're fertilized. That being said, though, Buddhism is a very big religion that spans, vast, lots of different geographical areas, some of which are quite impoverished and have very limited access, to different types of food. Out of all of the ways to get protein, unfertilized eggs are probably one of the least harmful ones. So, I mean, that's why Buddhism is a little bit flexible on this point, and the Buddha didn't come straight out and say, all Buddhists must be vegan, because there's also material cultures and material circumstances involved. And it's very interesting, actually, because when we think about Jainism, for example, today, we associate Jainism with vegetarianism. But actually, there's some evidence that Jainism wasn't an originally vegetarian religion. That Jainism also traditionally in the past had a similar approach to Buddhism. So, there's what's possible today and what's possible in the past, and sometimes those are different things, and the social choices we make around that, they're personal. They might be inspired by Buddhism, and many people, they are inspired, to take that non-harm ethic and to make food choices around that. And there are some people, their particular circumstances might make it difficult. So yeah, I think Buddhism can have something for everyone in that respect. So moving on to Cindy. But yeah, no, thank you for that comments all.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing, that every second chook that is born, being a male, is killed in the hen industry. So, that's a destruction of life of half of the birds that are born.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And, the same actually for milk production. There's not a happy future for the male calves.
Oh.
Yeah. So like I said, some of these issues, it's important to think about them, because it brings our attention to the fact that the type of social and cultural environment that the texts were written in it's not the social and cultural environment we have today. Again, in village societies, quite often it was more profitable to keep your cows alive than dead. Because cows, they have a very useful function in society, because again, they have things like milk, and the level of industrial scale slaughter that we have today is something that couldn't have been conceived of in the past. So I think, Bill's made some very great points, that it is important to be very conscious that, we still need to make an investigation into our actual social condition, and not just take it for granted, that there was one way that things were done in the past, and that's the be-all and end-all answer for how we should be reacting to very specific issues today. Okay, from Cindy to everyone. What about harmful animals, pests, e.g. mosquitoes, etc., that might need to be controlled for us to live safely? Okay, thanks, Cindy. And again, thank you for raising this, because in some countries, for example, I think like in Malaysia, they do actually have mandatory mosquito spraying that I understand is to control, things like malaria, etc. So, the choices of those particular governments that undertake this type of program, I don't live in one of these countries, so it's not really my place to, to critique without having a very deep exposure to this issue. But yeah, like I said, if we think about taking life as a circle, there's stuff in the center of the circle that everyone can agree is wrong. And there's stuff as you move out towards the edge of the circle that there might be, reasons why people choose to undertake activities that involve harm. So obviously, where they have chosen to undertake this type of thing in Malaysia, for example, it's not because anyone wants to go on a mosquito massacre. It's because, there has been some type of weighing up involved that you know, there's a risk from mosquito-borne disease, and you know, for whatever reason, that's been what's driving the particular policy decisions. I mean, I would never kill a mosquito, just for the record. But sometimes, you know, we do have to interact with local council bylaws that from time to time may require this type of thing. And, you know, sometimes if your choice, you know, is to shut the shop or do what the council requires you to do, you know, it's a really hard situation for people to be in. And, you know, in those type of situations, you know, the focus should actually be on intention. You know, why are you doing this? It's not because you want to be a mosquito murderer. It's because, you know, you don't actually have much of a choice. And also remembering that the ethical choices people make, it's voluntary. You know, if you want to undertake a life where for you your values are that, no matter what, I'll never kill a mosquito, I mean, that's okay. But these choices, you know, they're not choices we force on people. And again, it's because we have to live in the world. And living in the world, you know, it does involve a degree of harm. Although, you know, this particular type of culture, this non-harm culture or harm minimization culture that has come out of, you know, particular religious cultures of India, I think it has a lot to recommend itself, where we are actively looking for ways, you know, to live in harmony with the natural environment and to avoid harm as much as possible. I think, you know, it's actually a superior way of dealing with things, if it's possible. But like I said, sometimes we don't have, you know, that much degree of choice over our life. So anyway, I hope those are just some reflections. Yeah, I mean, sometimes too, with these things that make us uneasy as Buddhist practitioners, you know, there may be ways where you can personally decide for yourself what you're comfortable with. You know, you might be, you might be able to tolerate the fact that the pest guy is coming to your house, but you think to yourself personally, okay, I'm not going to be there when, you know, when they're doing this. So, you know, for ourselves, we have to know what we're going to be comfortable with and what's going to cause us post-traumatic stress disorder afterwards, and what's also going to have negative actions in the environment and in society. So, yeah, I mean, always hard issues. So probably, yeah, better to avoid, that sometimes life chucks us things that are very hard to avoid. Okay, so Michael's commented, the Buddhist Emperor Ashoka was the first monarch to ban the killing of whole lists of animals. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, certainly there are Ashokan edicts putting animals on protected lists. That's correct. I mean, the Emperor Ashoka himself was a meat eater, and after his conversion to Buddhism, you know, he did choose to reduce the number of animals that were offered at the royal table. So, yeah, interesting. I mean, it's interesting too how we think of Ashoka as well. There's a long tradition of Indian kings who had very pluralistic and open attitudes towards, you know, multiple religions, not only Buddhism. So when we see King Ashoka, you know, putting out these edicts for the subjects, you know, I'm sure these concepts like environmental protection would have been very popular with many religions, and not only with Buddhists. So, you know, we have we have very good models of pluralism within Buddhist culture as well. Okay, so I think we can keep moving on. So having abandoned the taking of what is not given, you abstain from taking what is not given. So, like I said, there's concentric circles. So in the middle of the circle, there's the type of theft you could be put in jail for. You know, there's things like fraud, stealth, deceit. all types of stealing. Even in ancient India, using what do you call it, like false weights and measures, that would have been enough to get you pretty severe and sometimes even capital punishment. So widely acknowledged as being theft. We're taking what is not given. There's not so many edge cases. At least I can't think of any at the moment. If anyone would like to think of, an edgy case where people actually disagree, is this stealing or not, feel free to put it in the chat. But, I typically don't get emails from people who are having a heart attack because they're wondering, is this stealing or not? Okay. So, and just focusing in a little bit more depth on sexual misconduct. So sometimes, when this is taught, sometimes, like say, for example, within the Sri Lankan Buddhist community in particular, sometimes it's just taught as avoiding adultery. Here, Ajahn has gone down the road of talking about consent. And again, many of these things are actually illegal. So I think, Ajahn has taken this concept of the things that everyone can acknowledge are bad, such as, because these things would be breaking laws. Okay, are there further questions at this point, or can we continue moving on? Okay, see you, Cynthia. Hope your other meeting goes well. Okay. Yeah, because if there are questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat. Okay, so we can see that we have very clear statements here that Buddhism is a deeply ethical path, and sometimes people have these questions about Buddhism. They wonder, once you're awakened, do you suddenly get a green light? Do you suddenly have permission, to have the crazy wisdom and stop being ethical? And the answer to that is no, because, the Buddha was deeply concerned with the roots of social problems. And we see this type of analysis, say, for example, in the Mahanidana Sutta, where we see social dependent origination. And, what actually is the fundamental root of many of these wrong actions? Either it's our ignorance, or it's our greed, or it's our hatred. So as a person becomes more awakened, actually, what they're giving up is the fundamental root of this, of wrong behavior. So they're becoming even more and more ethical. So, nothing radically changes. It's the same concept all the way down. We're giving up the roots. Okay, so moving on to right livelihood. So what now is right livelihood? So reading from the Digha Nikaya, here the noble disciple, having given up wrong livelihood, keeps himself by right livelihood. Okay, so new concept, this concept of right livelihood. I think there's actually like a right livelihood awards or something. It's a concept that has a lot of potential to be exported as something that's relevant for society in general. But for some particular reason, it's the mindfulness that's really taken the traction as something that has the potential to improve our lives. And a lot of people have criticized that because, they think actually this mindfulness movement is just a placebo. It's not actually dealing with the fundamental roots, of our problems, which may be environmental or social or, caused by, the material conditions of our life. So here this is actually showing that, yes, that the Buddha is concerned with your material livelihood, with how you live in the world. It's not just about next life. It's not just about, if you're just mindful, everything will be okay. we actually do have ethical obligations to the society and the world around us. And the idea is that by following our obligations, our minds will be able to become peaceful. And because they're already peaceful, then we won't have any issues when we go to meditate. So from the Digha, here the noble disciples, having given up wrong livelihood, keeps himself by right livelihood. And from the Anguttara Nikaya, from the Vanija Sutta, a lay follower should not engage in these 5 trades. What 5? Trading in weapons, trading in living beings, trading in meat, trading in intoxicants, and trading in poisons. A lay follower should not engage in these 5 trades. Again, here the concept being that what you do all day, it inevitably has an impact on your mind. And, the type of impact that some particular professions will have in your mind is likely to be significantly greater than others. And that's because of the degree of intention involved. Because obviously, say for example, if your whole livelihood is about trading in weapons, you're going to be thinking, how do I get the best weapon? How do I find better ways to kill people or to kill animals? And that intention is going to significantly shape your mind. And that's, why the Buddha is saying, actually, this is something that as Buddhist practitioners, we should commit to avoiding, because it's the opposite of what the Buddha is teaching, which is the right intention. And the same for trading in living beings. So things like human trafficking, just obviously wrong. Trading in meat, things like being a butcher, because again, your whole day is just going to be spent thinking about how do I kill this animal, getting a lot of tasty animals for the customers, and it's going to have an impact on you. And, that's not to say that people who do work as butchers for whatever reason, that, that they need to be excluded from Buddhism. Buddhism's for everyone. It just means that our actions have consequences. That's all. Trading in intoxicants. Again, so if you're if you're selling alcohol all day, what are you going to be thinking about? You're going to be thinking about ways to get people to buy alcohol. And if you've ever been to Uttar Pradesh, to that particular region, Bihar, these areas actually at the moment they have prohibition. So, currently you go to Bihar, you don't see any alcohol. And I personally, I really like that kind of society, because, it makes you feel very safe because, you don't have these very obvious social issues that come from that. And again, being a very poor society, I don't think that they could afford, to have any more social issues than they currently have. Thailand, though, there's currently no restrictions on alcohol. Sri Lanka, they have Poya Day restrictions on trading in alcohol, so you can't trade on the Buddhist holy days. But again, having less alcohol around, it makes for a better and safer society. And there's been a lot of efforts in recent years to put the plain packaging labeling on cigarettes, and people are more aware of the consequences. But actually, if we look at causes of hospitalisation and long-term health problems, no one's willing to actually take on alcohol because, Australians like to drink. But anyway, there you go. So the Buddha is saying that it's not a correct livelihood. And the role that law has around alcohol in different societies, what's suitable for Uttar Pradesh obviously isn't going to be suitable for Australia. If you had the same type of approach in Australia, it obviously just wouldn't work because there isn't the cultural support for it. In India, it's a lot different because there is a lot of cultural support around creating alcohol-free areas, especially in states like Bihar and UP. Okay, and trading in poisons. So again, obvious, if your whole job is about making things die, not a very suitable profession for someone who's looking to cultivate positive states and meditation. So a lay follower should not engage in these 5 trades. Okay, so the whole concept of right livelihood, again, it predates Buddhism. It's something that is also found in Jainism. The Buddhist list is more simplified, and it's in some senses, as it's typical of Buddhism as a whole, it's actually a lot more gentle in that it's not, it's not penalizing people for the minor harm that might occur in your day-to-day job. So it's not penalizing people because they have to dig a hole, to put a post-it or something. It's only really the more extreme edge of professions that the Buddha's recommending avoiding. So still lots and lots of other options. It's just, these, it's just the outer edge that's coming under here. And I mean, if your job is causing you enough concerns that you come back at the end of the day and you feel worried about it, maybe that's something you need to look at too, because the basic concept here is that, we need to have jobs that are actually contributing to society rather than wrecking society. Okay, so that Michael has a question. Does this mean a practicing Buddhist cannot work in a pub serving alcohol? Let me tell you a story from my life. So I originally, I got a job working as a coffee, as a barista. And later my work reassigned me to, to the, to be on the beer counter. And first of all, I had no idea how to even pour a beer because as a Buddhist, I had just had no exposure to beer. But I managed to get the liquid in the container and to take some money at the till. But later, I quit because I didn't like that type of environment. So, can you work in a pub serving alcohol? These things, the choices we make, they don't exist in a social vacuum. There may be conditions around that. For some people, it may be very difficult to get other work. But if you can possibly get other work, I'd recommend finding other work, because the type of environment that exists in a pub, not all pubs are the same. Some may have food and things as well. But it's not, sure, we have responsible service of alcohol and things, but, it's not something that can be seen as contributing to society in Buddhism. So, yeah, basic answer to that question is if you can possibly find another job, it may be better in the long run. Okay, so to Elise from the Metta Center, does this mean that buying and therefore eating meat is considered wrong livelihood as it is part of trading in meat? Like I said earlier, the Buddha probably wasn't vegetarian, so that all evidence suggests that the Buddha himself ate meat. And in terms of buying meat, in traditional Theravāda Buddhism, there's no, you can still buy meat and consider yourself as a person who's practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. That it's not covered. What would be covered would be having a job that requires you to spend more or less all of your days basically, working with butchering animals. And a lot of people have noted this as a criticism of the meat industry, that people who do work in abattoirs, etc., firstly, the people who work in these places, they're quite often already socially disadvantaged, that's the type of work they choose to have. But secondly, there's a higher rate sometimes of mental health issues of people who work in these places. So the reason that the Buddha has given us these guidelines, it's not to make certain segments of society pariahs. It's just to draw our attention to the fact, again, that our actions have consequences, and some of these consequences, they will affect our state of mind. So in giving up certain livelihoods and adopting better livelihoods, the Buddha is only asking us to do what's good for us. So, the Buddha is not saying you should all go hungry, you should all be out of a job. The Buddha is saying, actually, you should do what's good for yourself and for society. And I mean, that's part of the reason why I chose to ordain, because I look at Buddhism and, when the Buddha says, actually, you should give this up, you should cultivate this, nothing is extreme, everything, it's only what's good for us. So I hope that answers your question, Elise. So no, those particular two things don't come under wrong livelihood. Okay, great, wonderful. So we're on track. Okay, moving on. So what is right endeavour? I mean, that's a good question, actually. This word endeavour, I think it's a bit of an unusual word in this context. Sometimes we see right effort. The Pali here is samavayama. So what is right endeavour or right effort? So this is from the Pidana Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. There are these 4 right endeavours: restraint, abandonment, development, and preservation. So we've changed tone a little. So previously we were talking about ethics, and now we're starting to get into the meditation-oriented end of the Noble Eightfold Path. So there are particular ways of looking at the Noble Eightfold Path that actually start from this point. Say, for example, the 37 Wings of Awakening. This is actually the point where the path starts for that particular group. So in some traditions of Buddhism, they talk about preliminaries. So in Pali language Buddhism, what we've done so far, this is the preliminaries. So these are the things we need to get sorted up until right actions, so we can actually start to seriously even talk about beginning meditation. And I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a muchness, do you do your meditation first and fix up your life later? Or do you fix up your life first and do your meditation later? So both of these things should be supporting each other the whole way through. But, the more fixed up your life is, the chances of your meditation going well are significantly higher. I mean, within reason. So, okay, from the Anguttara, from the Pidana Sutta, there are these 4 right endeavours: restraint, abandonment, development, preservation. So what is the endeavour of restraint? In Pali, this is called samvara. So when you see an object, you do not let yourself get sucked in by marks and features that generate defilements. Since if you left the faculty of sight unrestrained, unskillful states of wanting and aversion would afflict you. Instead, you practice wisdom when seeing, you guard the faculty of sight, and you undertake the restraint of sight. So there's a couple of things that have happened here. Significant change in tone. Now we're talking about seeing stuff. So when we see stuff, what the text is saying, we don't let ourselves get sucked in by the marks and features that generate defilements. So there are a couple of key terms here. One key term is mark. So mark in Pali is nimitta. So that being the general features of the object. So things like man, woman, food, hamburger, all of these things are the nimitta or mark of the object, and features. So features in Pali is anibhyanjana. So, what is a feature? Things like pretty, ugly, hot, cold, tasty, not tasty. All of these things are called features. And the third key point here is that generate defilements. So certain ways of perceiving the world, they have a tendency to encourage us down certain emotional paths. So if when we see that hamburger, we start thinking and ruminating about how tasty it would be, about that great pickle smell, that's going to lead us to down the path of greed for the hamburger. So actually, where do we have to stop that? Where do we have to stop that journey? Sure, we can try to stop it later after we've thought about, how tasty that hamburger would be, how much we really need the cheese, or if you're Bill, like thinking about how great the vegan hamburger would be. So, where do you stop? Actually, what's being said here is it's better to stop earlier. So, and what the text is saying is if you left the faculty of sight unrestrained, unskillful states of wanting and aversion would afflict you. Okay, so instead you practice wisdom when seeing, you guard the faculty of sight, and you undertake the restraint of sight. So, maybe you've seen that, seen the hamburger, and okay, it's, it's a hamburger. It's there. It serves a useful purpose in the world, but we're not getting involved with it. We're not, thinking about all of its tasty features. We're just leaving this stuff in the world alone. So I think that's the key point that's being made here, is you practice wisdom when seeing. So, none of the things we see in the world actually compel us to react. There's no rule saying we need to feel upset when someone says something negative. There's no rule saying we need to be excited when we see something we like. And, when we start going down this path, what ends up happening is, as the text is saying, unskillful states of wanting and aversion would afflict you. So the basic idea in terms of the 5 hindrances is that we have some hindrances, some of these obstacles to meditation, which arise on the basis of our interaction with the external world. So the Buddha called that, rather uncreatively, as being distracted externally. So it is what it sounds like. You are distracted by the things in the world. So what is being distracted externally? It's it's wanting the nice things and hating the unnice things. So in Pali, we have 2 words. One is kamachanda, which is the sense desire, and the other is vyapada, which is ill will. So kamachanda can involve, basically just any desire that's exercised towards an object in the 5 sense world. And ill will covers a range of negative states, including just, frustration, depression, or just basically any negative state that arises on the basis of something we've seen or heard or touched, etc., in the 5 sense world. And my senior meditation teachers, like Ajahn Brahm, have made this point quite clear. These 2 things, this wanting the nice stuff and not wanting the bad stuff, they're actually the 2 major obstacles to meditation. And we'll see this point taken up again later when we look at right mindfulness, because how does the text on right mindfulness begin? How does the Satipatthana Sutta begin? it begins with the Pali words, not right at the beginning, but in the introduction, Ven Nyanatiloka abhijja dhammanasang. So abhijja is a synonym for wanting. Dhammanasang is a synonym for aversion. So what we'll actually see later on is that the prerequisite for beginning meditation is to not be, to not be caught up in this stuff. Because when you're feeling frustrated or when you're feeling sad or mopey, whatever, you can't meditate. So if you come to meditation and you think, gosh, I'm feeling really depressed, my life's out of control, I have no money for the rent, you're not going to have a really great meditation. So what your meditation needs to consist of, first of all, is actually to deal with that, whatever that wanting or aversion is. Okay, so what counts as restraint of sight? Restraint of sight, the basic definition, is regarding objects in the world in a way that does not lead to wanting and aversion. So fairly important and straightforward concept. Okay, moving on. Having heard a sound, having noticed a smell, having sensed a taste, having felt a bodily feeling, having cognized something in the mind, you do not let yourself get sucked in by marks and features that generate defilements. Since if you left the mind faculty unrestrained, unskillful states of wanting and aversion would afflict you. Instead, you practice wisdom with the mind, you guard the mind, and you undertake the restraint of the mind. This is called the endeavor to restrain. And what is okay, so just a little bit of expansion on some of the themes I mentioned earlier. I think we've covered that ground. Okay. The endeavor to abandon. So this is in Pali, the Bahana Padana. Bahana being abandoning, Padana being endeavor or effort. So one term for meditation center, say for example in Sinhala language, is Padanakara. So Padana, like I said, being effort, Gara being the house. So, how do you call a meditation center? There's also this term like, the effort center, the place for striving. So, and even, one of the terms for a monk or a nun in Buddhism, we have this word samana. The feminine form is sāmaṇerī. The root of that word is the root shram, which means to strive. Okay, and what is the endeavor to abandon? Here you do not maintain an arisen thought of wanting. You abandon it, let it go, renounce it, and bring it to cessation. You do not indulge an arisen thought of aversion, an arisen thought of harming. Whenever bad, unwholesome states arise, you abandon them, let them go, renounce them, and bring them to cessation. This is called the endeavor to abandon. Okay, so sometimes there's these very beautiful images in Pali texts, and one of the images, I think, to get rid of something totally, is that you make it like a palm stump so that it can't regrow anymore. So once you cut a palm tree, it doesn't suddenly recrown because all of the growth hormones are up in the top of the crown where the leaves are. So you cut it off and it'll never grow again. But here, talking about at the level of practice, so you don't tolerate these thoughts when you have them inside of you. The text is saying you abandon them, you let them go, renounce them, and bring them to cessation. So sometimes, again, in popular meditation movements, there might be this concept of just watch it, just observe, just be passive, and I think that's a really bad idea. This is just me personally, but I think there's a point in this, because if you start your meditation retreat, you have two weeks in solitary retreat. If you start on day one, with, you know, and you're depressed on day one, and you think, oh, I'm just going to observe this and do nothing, you know, there's an equal chance you'll still be depressed on day 7. You know, again, just my opinion, because what's actually being said here is what needs to happen, is that, you know, whatever the aversion was, whatever the craving was, basically, you know, the sooner it's gone, the better. And we'll be looking next at some of the ways of actually getting rid of these thoughts, or the ways of dealing with unwholesome thoughts. That's in the next sutta. I mean, thoughts themselves are what's called karma vipaka. So they're fruit of karma. So we don't actually have active control over what comes up, obviously, because of the causes and conditions involved in creating that thought. You know, where do thoughts bubble up from? Who really knows? Maybe the subconscious. But by making the effort, hopefully that's making also some new good karma, you know, that's conditioning better mind states in the future. Okay, so we've had two themes. We've had the endeavour of restraint, the samvara, and the endeavour to abandon, the pahana. And now we have a little digression, which is, this is actually the Vitakka Santana Sutta, or the discourse on the removal of distracting thoughts from the Majjhima Nikaya. So when you are mindful of some object and there arises in you afflicting unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, aversion, and delusion, then, so we have 5 options here. So these they've been ordered in terms of effort. So you should give attention to some other object that generates wholesome mind states. Thus, unwholesome states are abandoned and subside. With their disappearance, your mind becomes internally steady, settled, unified, and still. So, you know, maybe you have a friend called Karen, and when you think about Karen, you know, you start to get really angry because of the stuff she says. So maybe you should think about someone who's not Karen. So just think about anything else, and, you know, hopefully then your anger will subside. So that's suggestion number 1. Suggestion number 2 is you should examine the danger in those unwholesome thoughts. So, you know, if you keep on being angry at Karen, that's not really going to help the situation. It's not going to help Karen. It's not going to help you. So, you know, it's just going to make you look ugly, and it's just going to make Karen feel bad. So actually, it might be better to adopt a slightly more positive and constructive attitude. So, I mean, that might be one way of examining the danger. And, you know, I have to apologize if anyone knows a person called Karen. I don't know anyone called Karen, and that's why I chose that name. Okay, moving on. Number 3, you should try to ignore those unwholesome thoughts and do not give attention to them. So, you know, like we think about a lot of stuff during the day. It's quite uncommon for someone to actually just, you know, for them to pick one thought and for that to be their whole day. So I'm sure there's a lot of other things that maybe, you know, could be picked. So, you know, maybe just ignoring them and not developing them is also an option. Okay, 4, you should give attention to stilling the causes of those thoughts. I mean, this is quite interesting because in terms of how the Pali's been translated, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, I think the terminology he has here is you should give attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts. So implying that actually you should develop samadhi and just pay more attention to being peaceful. So, you know, if you just pay attention to the silence. That might be a way to get the thoughts to slow down. But here, I mean, it looks a bit more like you're focusing on the defilement. So I'm not 100% clear, but if you were to follow Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's line of reasoning, it would probably be more like paying attention to the silence. Okay, number 5. So we can see this is the most effort. You should clench your teeth with your tongue, pressed against the roof of your mouth, and beat down, constrain, and crush any such afflicting unwholesome thoughts. With the disappearance of them, your mind becomes internally steady, settled, unified, and still. So obviously this is supreme in terms of effort, right? We're at number 5. This is like this is 5 out of 5 on the effort scale. So, you know, maybe you've been angry at Karen all week and this isn't going anywhere. You've tried everything and, you know, you don't want to live your life like this, but you can't see it going anywhere anytime soon. So, I mean, sometimes our minds, they're naughty because we give them the chance to be naughty. So what's being suggested here is is don't give it a chance. Basically, you know, give it an ultimatum that this is how things are going to be, and you, mind, are not going to be angry at Karen because obviously that's bad for everyone. So with your tongue pressed against the roof of your mouth, so a posture that suggests, you know, a degree of effort and concentration, you beat down. So you commit to not thinking these thoughts, constrain and crush any such afflicting unwholesome thoughts. So no matter what, you know, maybe thinking, you know, even if my blood dries up, even if it kills me, I'm going to think about anything other than being angry with Karen. So, I mean, it's out of context, it sounds a little extreme, but some of these things, they have actually, you know, there are similar approaches in psychology. There's something called stop therapy. You know, and the concept of stop therapy is that, you know, when you have these unwanted thoughts, you become conscious of them and, you know, instead of thinking that thought, you tell yourself to stop. So this is just, you know, it's a stop therapy with a little bit more force behind it. So it's not that you tell yourself to stop, it's that no matter what, you know, even if the effort kills you, you know, you are going to stop. So obviously, you know, if you spend your whole time like this, you may get tired, but certainly it is one tool from the toolbox that, you know, the Buddha is recommending. And sometimes you do read in the stories of the monks and nuns during the Buddha's time, you know, that maybe they've had a really tough time in meditation. You know, they spent the whole time, you know, thinking about sexual urges, or they spent the whole time doing whatever people think about in meditation, and nothing's working. And what they do is actually they make the determination, you know, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to lie down until I've actually dealt with this defilement. So, you know, there is such a thing as effort, and sometimes it works. So, I mean, Ajahn Brahm says that you know, when he was first learning meditation, he also made one of these determinations. You know, he said, I'm going to get enlightened right here. I'm not going to move from my seat until I get enlightened. And he said, I think he said he lasted about 30 minutes. So ultimately, these things are due to causes and conditions. And the effort is just one of the causes. Okay, are there any questions at this point? Normally, when we do this particular text with monastics, there are a lot of questions because people are a bit uncertain about the clenching your teeth thing. People wonder, you know, is there an easier way? So in chat, is anyone unconvinced? Okay, so Elise says, does holding back lead to bypassing? That's an interesting question. So I think I'm interested in what you mean by holding back and bypassing. So by holding back, do you mean like not making the effort? I assume that's what you mean. And bypassing, I mean, bypassing is a very specific term that emerges in the work of, a couple of authors who have actually published on the topic of spiritual bypassing. I'm not, I'm not the spiritual bypassing expert because it's not a concept that is particularly useful for me personally, but just to give a little bit of context about this term in general. So you have this idea of that sometimes people use their spirituality as a way of avoiding significant issues in their lives or in their own behavior. And sometimes people do this by different techniques. Like, they might, say, for example, in a dysfunctional spiritual circle, it might be that, whatever the teacher does is okay because he's an awakened being, etc., etc., etc. Or slightly more concerningly, just to like modify some details from an actual case that happened. If someone commits suicide, it may just be that they weren't, putting enough effort into the practice, and that we shouldn't be affected by it because it's all anicca anyway. So, I mean, these might be kind of examples of things that could count as bypassing. Where because everything's anicca, or because, we're these so-called spiritual practitioners, the issues and responsibilities that normal people have, somehow they don't apply. So back to the question, I mean, like, does not making an effort or holding some energy back lead to bypassing? I mean, there are certain beliefs I would associate with bypassing, like the belief that somehow your spirituality makes everything okay, or maybe just a lack of self-reflection in general. I'm not sure that not making an effort is something I'd really associate with bypassing. But like, maybe the people who bypass haven't made an effort to actually look at the issues that are relevant. They're just bypassing them. So yeah, I'm not really sure about that one, but I mean, thank you for raising it. My dear friend and brother Bhante Sujato.She, he has an extensive interest in bypassing, and I think he has either done or will do a workshop for ABCAP, for the Australian Association of Buddhist Counsellors and Psychotherapists, on the topic of bypassing. So I would recommend directing your bypassing related questions to him. I mainly just do Pali texts, and sometimes people, also give me their very difficult ethical conundrums about their lives. So, sometimes we also look at how Pali texts relate to your life. But, probably the topic of bypassing is slightly outside of my specialty. So anyway, I don't think that was a great answer, so we can move on. Okay, thank you, Ayya. That's very generous that you thanked me for that non-answer. Okay, we can move on. So, okay. But I mean, the point with meditation, right, if you're making an effort, ideally you should actually become calmer. So it's not that you just, you wear your poor body out with your tongue pressed against the roof of your mouth. It's that you wear your body out a little bit, you get your defilement under control, and then you can actually sit calmly. There's a point to these things. And Yeah, what to do? Buddhism is work. Like I said, Buddhism is Theravāda. Buddhism is a doctrine of action. So, the energy that we take to working out the causes of our unhappiness, it's its own reward, because what's the reward? We can become happy. Okay, so the endeavor to develop. That being said, though, the common trope is that Westerners typically bring too much attempts to control to their meditation. So, meditation, samadhi, ultimately it is a passive state of having a still mind. So quite often the effort we bring to it can actually be counterproductive to that state if it's already settled. So this is talking about things that we do because our mind isn't settled. So ultimately applying this energy should be something that's contributing to our mind becoming settled rather than to our minds becoming unsettled. Because if your mind is becoming unsettled as a result of this, what you're doing, it's not bhavana, it's not mental development, it's just making your mind more unsettled. Okay, moving on. So endeavor to develop. Reading from the Pidana Sutta again. And what is the endeavor to develop? Here you develop the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, so that's sati, the enlightenment factor of exploring the Dhamma, so Dhammavicaya, the enlightenment factor of energy, virya, the enlightenment factor of rapture, piti, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, passaddhi, the enlightenment factor of stillness, samadhi, the enlightenment factor of equanimity, vipeka, every one of which is based upon seclusion, physical and mental, fading away, and cessation, maturing in release. This is called the endeavor to develop. Okay, so again, we're up to number 3 of right endeavor or right effort. And I feel really disappointed now because we only have 5 minutes left, and this is actually my favorite topic because we get to talk about the good stuff, we get to talk about the joy, and we get to talk about this particular set, which is the set of the 7 awakening factors, which is probably like one of my all-time favorite doctrinal sets in Buddhism. So maybe when we come back next week, we can have a look at some of these in more detail. So, these 7, they're an account of what happens in meditation. So, what are we developing? We're developing our meditation. And some of these factors are energizing. So starting from 2 to 4, these are factors that are associated with energy, things like mindfulness, exploring the Dhamma, energy, rapture. And from 5 to 7 are tranquilizing factors. So the tranquility, the stillness, and the equanimity. So, and number 1, the sati, the mindfulness, is always helpful. So, if we come into meditation and, we're already feeling quite energized, we don't need to go through the whole preceding set. We can just start from that point and go straight into the tranquility section. But, this is a very beautiful account of what actually happens in meditation, because we come into meditation with mindfulness. So the classical example is that we set our bodies erect, we draw our attention to our breathing, we explore the Dhamma. So what's actually meant by investigating Dhammas or investigating mental states, it means that we can distinguish between the wholesome and unwholesome mental states. So we can distinguish between what actually is a hindrance and what's not a hindrance. And we can actually cultivate the removal of the hindrances. And, we also have energy. So once we've removed the hindrances, we feel energized because we don't have these negative mental states weighing us down. we experience rapture or piti. So we might feel, for example, that our bodies are very light, that our hair's standing on end, that, there are like waves of joy, and we're like riding on the piti waves of joy. A lot of these mental and physical phenomena that are associated with joy, and you can get very extensive analyses of these. One of my favorites is in the Visuddhimagga, because in the Visuddhimagga it talks about the pregnant lady who wanted to go to the Chaitya, to the stupa for a ceremony, but she couldn't go because, she was very late in her pregnancy and her parents didn't want her to tire herself by going out. So she stayed at home on the balcony just looking out over the stupa thinking, oh, I wish I was there. And, she looked and she saw, all of the bhikkhus, all of the bhikkhunis, all of the lay people all gathered at the stupa. And she was so joyful, she rose up like a rubber ball and she bounced onto the stupa. And her parents asked, how did you get here? And she says, I don't quite recall, at last minute I was standing on the balcony. So you have these very, a lot of different analyses of different types of joy, right up to the uplifting joy that physically lifts us up into levitation. So, and if we look at actually in terms of pre-modern meditation systems, in Thailand there's something called Baran Gamathan or Baran Kamatana that I mentioned previously. Baran meaning Purana, which is old, Kamatana being the the meditation style based on the 40 Kamatanas from the Visuddhimagga. And these pre-modern meditation systems in particular actually place a lot of emphasis on joy, because in the pre-modern Thai system, the entry point is joy, and that's how you begin meditation, with an invitation that certain joyful states, they have an open invitation to come into your body. So meditation, all of that clearing out the hindrances, it's just making our bodies and minds a welcoming place that that joy can inhabit if it wants to. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, that we've laid out the welcome mat by clearing out the hindrances and so forth until tranquility. So what happens after the joy? We feel tranquil. It doesn't have to be the bliss and levitation forever. There's peace after that, stillness, and we look back on all of that with upekkha, with equanimity, and we're peaceful towards the whole lot. Okay, I better not talk any longer because I have reached the end of the time. So Michael, I'll take your question next week if that's okay. We can start there. So anyway, I hope everyone has a great week. Thanks for staying with us for so long. And I'll see you next week. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure you come back next week if possible.